Right, hello all. Just a quick video on the magic triangle. Woo! Cool. So, the magic triangle is the way in which chord progressions are organised in general. They either follow the blue route around this triangle that you can see on screen, so they start on the tonic on chord 1, then they move over, they visit the subdominant, chord 4, they might then move over to the dominant and then back to the tonic. Or they might bypass the subdominant altogether, they might just go straight from the tonic to the dominant and then back. So the important thing there is that that we've got a kind of a likelihood, sort of we've got once we're on a particular chord, we know more or less where it's likely to go. So if we're on the tonic, we know that we're very, very likely to go to the subdominant or the dominant. If we're on the subdominant, we know that we're very likely to go over to the dominant. And if we're on the dominant, you're very, very likely to go back to the tonic. Equally, we can say that we are less likely to go from one chord or one chord area to another. So if I'm on the subdominant, you're very unlikely to go back to the tonic. If you're on the dominant, you're very, very unlikely to go back to the subdominant. That's just generally how chord progressions work. I should say that these chord progressions are really kind of, I'm speaking mostly about classical chord progressions here. I'm speaking mostly about chord progressions within a functional harmony context. So if you're looking at music from anywhere from Bach up until, say, the late 19th century, any music that claims to be classical in one sense or another, it's probably going to follow these kinds of rules to a certain extent. So there's the magic triangle. I'm just going to show you what that might look like in C major. So in C major, the tonic chord is C, C, E, G. The subdominant chord is F, F, A, C. And the dominant chord is G, G, B, D. And so if we're following this route round, if we're following the blue route, we're going to start on C major, head over to F major, over to G major, and then back to C major. So I'll just show you what that might sound like. Or indeed, if we're just going between tonic and dominant, that's just going to be... So that's what it looks like in C major. But that only really talks about 3 chords within the key. And as we're aware, there's actually, there's seven triads within a particular key. So we need to move on and sort of work out how those other triads relate. And so we can expand each of these chords into chord areas. We've got a tonic chord here, a subdominant chord there, and a dominant chord there. And what we can say is that if a chord shares 2 notes with the sort of the chord of the sort of the chord area, then it can function as a substitute for that sort of chord area. So for instance, we've got chord 1 here. Chord 1 shares 2 notes with chord 6 and chord 3, so those 2 chords can have a kind of tonic function. The subdominant function, chord 4, shares 2 notes with chord 2 and chord 6, so similarly chord 2 and chord 6 can function in a kind of subdominant way, and the dominant shares 2 notes with chord 7 and chord 3, so those 2 chords could also function as a kind of dominant. So what does this look like in C major? This is what it looks like. Here's chord 1, C, E, G. Chord 6 is A, C, E, so you can see that that C and E are present within the sort of the tonic chord. We've got chord 3. Chord 3 is E, G, B, and that E and G are present within the tonic chord. We've got chord 4 here, F, A, C again. Chord 2, D, F, A, shares 2 notes, the F and the A, with chord 4, so it could have a subdominant function. chord 6, A and is, sorry for the chord 6 contains the notes A, C, E, so can function as a kind of subdominant chord because it shares that A and C. Similarly, with chord 5 contains G, B and D. Chord 7 contains B, D, F. That B and D are present in chord 5. And chord 3, E, G, B, are also present in chord 5. So we can say that chord 3 can also be used as a kind of dominant. Now, some of these are more common than others. So, chord 1, 6, 2, 4 and 5 are the really common chords. Chord 7 appears sometimes, but only really appears in first inversion, and again, only really between chord 1 and 1B. So it's kind of fulfilling a sort of, a really straightforward dominant function there. And chord 3 is very, very rare. You don't come across chord 3 very often, certainly in a major key. You don't come across chord 3 very often at all. So although these, I've sort of listed all the chords here, chords 1, 2, 4, 5 and 6 are certainly the most common chords. Those are your sort of primary, chords 1, 4 and 5 are your primary chords, and chords 2 and 6 are your sort of, secondary chords to round things out. Chords 3 and 7 are very rare indeed. So that's basically it. That's what the magic triangle looks like. And if you're, thinking in these terms, it can sort of guide you if you're trying to write a chord progression for a piece of music, but it can also help if you're trying to analyse a piece of music. If you're looking at a chord and you're like, I don't really know what this chord is, you can often look at the chord it's going to and work out then how that chord is functioning. You could maybe even work out where that chord has come from, and then maybe try to work out equally what function that chord has, whether it has a tonic function, a subdominant function, or a dominant function. So what does this look like in context? Let's have a look at a few examples. So here's the beginning of Beethoven's Piano Sonata Opus 10, number 2. I'll just play it through so you've got an idea of what it sounds like. So straight away we can see that we're starting in the tonic, we go to the dominant, then back to the tonic, and then we've got this sort of tonic, dominant, tonic, and then straight over to a sort of subdominant chord, kind of dominant chord, over to chord 1, and then to chord 4, and then 4, 5, 1, 2, 5, 1. So we can kind of see either a 1, 5, 1 type progression going through, or we're doing our 1, 4, 5, 1 all the way through. And that's the kind of thing that gives a chord progression a sense of direction. We're either going from the tonic to the dominant and then back to the tonic, or we're working our way round, going tonic, subdominant, dominant, back to the tonic. That's what that kind of looks like. So let's move on. Let's have a look at another example. Here's the beginning of Schubert's Impromptu number 3 from the Opus 90 set. It's in G flat major. I'll just play it through again. So there's the beginning of the Schubert piece. Again, we can kind of see that we're starting off with chord 1, go to chord 6, to chord 2B, 5 and 1. So we're tracing our way around this triangle. 1, we're going to chord 2, chord 6, which I've kind of labelled as having a subdominant function here, then over to chord 2, sort of chilling out in this subdominant area, over to chord 5, and then back to a kind of chord 1. Then from that chord 1, go over to chord 2, over to 5, and then back to 1. So we're sort of tracing our way through this triangle. That's a useful way of understanding this chord progression. I'll just show you one last example, this time in a minor key. This is the Chopin Nocturne Opus 48. I'll just play it through again. And so again, it's doing this similar kind of route. We're going for chord 1, to chord 4, or to chord 6 even, over to chord 5, back to chord 1, then 1, over to chord 4, to 2-7, 2-7B even, over to chord 5, and then back to 1. So we can see we're kind of tracing this route a lot of the time. So, as I say, it's relatively useful in an analytical context. So you can always kind of work out what the function of a chord is, or it's useful to think in terms of these functions so that you're aware of what chords are likely. It's useful within a composition context, because if you're trying to write a chord progression and you need it to sound like it's got a real sense of flow, like it's got a real sense of direction, then keeping this generalized chord progression in mind, where you're going from the tonic area to the subdominant area to the dominant area and then back to the tonic area, that's really useful if you're trying to work out the harmony of a particular for a passage in your piece, or trying to work out the harmony for a particular theme. It's useful within an improvisational context, because if you are trying to work out something at the piano or trying to improvise something, you can again keep that generalized chord progression in mind. So I hope that's useful. I hope that's something that you can make use of in your composition work or your analytical work. And thank you very much. Cheers.